If you use butane for cooking like I do, you probably end up with a lot of these. And a question that has probably come up for you is, what am I supposed to do with these things after they're empty? Well, I'm going to answer that question in this video.
Maximalist Minibus with Mary and Captain and you. Get on the bus!
A lot of nomads and campers these days are opting for butane over propane for cooking. Both propane and butane are LPGs, liquefied petroleum gases, which means that they're byproducts of crude oil or natural gas refining, and then they've been converted from gas to liquid for storage. Both butane and propane take up a lot less space as liquid, so that's why they're converted to liquid, and that makes them a lot easier to transport than if you had to transport them as gases. One difference between the two, though, is that propane has a lower boiling point, which means it works better at a very low temperature. Now, I've heard people say that this means you should cook with propane and not butane if you're in a cold climate, but I think you would have to be in a very cold climate for it to actually make a difference in cooking. In heating, that's a different story. You know, homes are heated with propane because you can store propane outside, which it wouldn't really be advisable for butane. But I've cooked on both propane stoves and butane stoves in some very cold situations, and I haven't seen a significant difference. The other big difference is how much pressure they exert when they're liquefied. And this difference is why they're sold in such different containers. Propane is sold in these are the little green 1-pounders. You've probably seen these, maybe you use these. And of course you can also get bigger tanks that are refillable. I don't have one of those to show you. I used to, but I don't anymore, but you know what I mean. These green ones are technically not refillable, though there are kits that will let you refill them. Be careful with that though. Propane is a lot cheaper. It's a lot cheaper, especially if you use the big refillable bottle, but it's harder to carry because the bottles are heavier and the high pressure makes it slightly more dangerous. You've probably heard the horror stories about like a food truck where they accidentally left the propane valve cracked open a tiny bit and then somebody comes in, lights the stove, and boom, blows the whole thing up. You're not really ever going to see that with butane because, first of all, the way it's sold generally, you can't accidentally leave the valve open, and the other thing is that there's so much less pressure. Butane canisters. See, butane, because it has less pressure when it's liquefied, it can be sold in pretty thin cans. It doesn't need that thick wall that you need to contain the pressure of propane, and these are very lightweight. They're easy to store. It's one of the main reasons people opt for butane. It's certainly the reason I opt for butane, because it sure ain't the price. Did I mention it's more expensive? I used to use propane, but I don't honestly go through enough to warrant making space for and carrying a big tank. I'm one person. I don't cook all that much. I cook every day, multiple times a day, but I'm still only one person. And if you're using the little green 1-pounders for propane, it's really, the price difference becomes a lot less significant. I have 2 different single burner butane stoves that I use. I have this one and this one. This one's cuter, but this one, they both work great. And the way they work is the butane cartridge locks in. This one has a little lever that locks it in. This one, you just lock it in by turning it, but the butane locks in there, and then turn the ignition and it ignites. Very simple. I also have this little heater that runs on butane. I'll save the appliances for another video because we're just going to talk about the gas right now. Butane is a great way to go for van life and bus life, and especially if you live in a car, because, you know, it's just so handy, but it does pose some problems. Disposal is probably the biggest one once you get past cost. Is it legal to throw butane cans in the trash? In some places there's no specific rules about it, in other places you're going to get fined. But even if it's not illegal, it's kind of rude, I think, to throw something in the trash that could be potentially explosive, because people do work at the dump after all, so yeah. So why is it potentially explosive if it's empty? Well, since butane is stored and sold at such a low pressure, it's not always possible to make sure that all of it's been pushed out of the can. So when your butane canister is empty, you know, even if you shake it, you might hear something in there, you might not, but even if it seems like it's empty, it might not be empty. And then if it gets exposed to flame or even extreme heat, it just goes boom. And like other solvents, it's considered hazardous waste. The other issue is that as someone who cares about the environment, I don't feel great just tossing these things away. I recycle my drink cans, and I drink a ridiculous amount of that carbonated water seltzer stuff. No, I love my bubble water, but I save those cans. I put them aside for recycling. I burn my paper trash in the campfire. But again, not throwing this in the campfire. And if you throw it in the trash, you're either potentially creating a hazard, and you might even be setting yourself up for a fine. Then there's the space issue. I crush my water cans down so they take up less room until I can get to the dump. But again, if this contains some gas, can I crush it? Well, yes you can. And once you do, you can recycle it, but not until you get every last bit of gas out of there. So how do you do that? You do that with this tool. Here's how it works. It's almost like an upside down can opener. You put it on the rim here and you just make a hole. It's just a little hole, and you'll probably smell some gas when you do that. I make like 4 or 5 of them around the edge because I just want to be sure. So by puncturing the can, you're eliminating the possibility that any gas is trapped in there, and then to let the people at the recycling center know that you've emptied it, you can crush the can. So that's going to save you space, avoid fines, help the environment, and it's going to keep the guy at the recycling center from blowing up. So I'd say that's a win-win. Win-win. 4 wins. 4 wins. Now, technically, you don't need this thing to pierce the can. You can pierce it with something else, but it's super convenient. It's very cheap. It has a special blade that's made for this purpose, and it feathers out so that the gas doesn't come pouring straight out at you. It does the job really well, and it's not very expensive, so I'm going to put a link in the description. There's a couple other ones on the market. Maybe I'll put those links too so you can decide which ones you want, but go get one. Okay, so that's how you dispose of these little things. Hope you got something out of that, and I'll talk to you next time. Happy cooking.